Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am so excited to welcome you all to this program. We are really delighted and honored to be hosting Annamie Paul, leader of Canada's Green Party, here at our virtual CJL tonight. So whether you're joining from anywhere across the US or Canada or somewhere else around the world, we're delighted to have you. My name is Claire Spalding. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Innovation Fellow at the CJL, and I'll be moderating the conversation tonight along with a grad student at Princeton, Nick Choquette-Levy, who'll be joining me. And we're really excited to get started. In a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to introduce Ms. Paul. First, I just want to share some gratitude. Thank you so much to Ira Dunn and Robin Rudofker, Debbie Orell, all of our sponsors who helped make this program happen. Again, it's really a delight to be here tonight and to be able to host Ms. Paul. So I want to thank everyone for your support. Yeah, we're going to start just to give you the plan of the evening. We're going to start with Ms. Paul sharing her story, sharing a bit about how she got to where she is today, as well as some of her thoughts around the current state of affairs in the world regarding climate change policy. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A, and most of this hour will be Q&A. Please, everyone, keep yourselves muted the whole time. You'll be able to submit questions via the chat to me and Nick, and then we'll be moderating. We'll be pulling out some questions to share with Ms. Paul. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick to start us off.
Great, thank you, Claire. And good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Choquette-Levy. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. My pronouns are he, him, his. And while I'm a proud Canadian, tonight I'm joining you from Highland Park, New Jersey, on the historic land of the Lenni Lenape peoples. It's my great honor to introduce our featured speaker tonight, Annamie Paul. Ms. Paul is the daughter of two immigrants who arrived to Canada from the Caribbean in the 1960s. Even at an early age, she displayed a knack for public policy and leadership, serving as a page in the Ontario legislature at the young age of 12. Ms. Paul then went on to complete a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Ottawa and a Master's of Public Affairs here at Princeton University, where she was an active member of the Center for Jewish Life. Ms. Paul is called to the bar in Ontario and has participated in several prestigious fellowships for social entrepreneurs and policy leaders, including the Action Canada and Echoing Green Fellowships and the Recruitment of Policy Leaders program. Ms. Paul has substantial experience working on issues of human rights and conflict prevention. She worked as an advisor to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, director for a leading conflict prevention NGO in Brussels, and co-founded an innovation hub in Barcelona for international NGOs working on global challenges. Through all these experiences, Ms. Paul has developed fluency in 4 languages and also serves on the boards of numerous NGOs related to climate and human rights. Throughout her career, Ms. Paul has also been a leader for promoting diversity in Canadian politics. After graduating from Princeton, she founded and directed the Canadian Center for Political Leadership, which is a nonpartisan charity that trained women and underrepresented minorities to run for electoral office. She has also worked with Operation Black Vote Canada and Equal Voice Canada, which also work to diversify political representation in the country. And she's published several articles on these issues. In 2019, Ms. Paul entered electoral politics herself, running as the Green Party candidate in downtown Toronto against Canada's then finance minister, essentially one of the most entrenched incumbent ridings. And while she didn't win that election, she posted the second best Green Party showing ever in the Greater Toronto area and became the international affairs critic of the Green Party's shadow cabinet. In October of this year, Annamie Paul bested 7 other candidates and was elected as the new leader of the Green Party of Canada. This historic election established several firsts, including the first Black woman to lead a national party in Canada and the first Jewish woman to do so as well. In a joint op-ed in the Toronto Star, esteemed members of 3 different political parties across the political spectrum lauded Ms. Paul's election, stating, quote, "By any measure, this remarkably accomplished candidate is an outstanding new presence on the landscape of Canadian politics." We're very lucky to have Ms. Paul join us for a conversation and Q&A tonight. Please join me in extending a virtual warm welcome to Green Party leader and Princeton alumnus Annamie Paul. Ms. Paul, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight, and now over to you.
Thank you very much. This is not where I normally do this. I want to apologize to the organizers because we actually had a great run through and had a lovely background with a lot of greenery, but this is politics and circumstances overtake. And I normally live in Toronto, but I'm coming to you from a conference room on Parliament Hill. I've been up here for the entire day because our government just provided their fall fiscal statement, fall economic statement, I think they called it, which is, I would say, sort of like a State of the Union light. This is their statement where they lay out their priorities for the next 6 months or so and further into the future. And they moved up the schedule. It was supposed to be next week, but they moved it up to today. So I've been here. I was in lockup for part of the day, reading through the document, and then I've been doing media all day, and just finished my last one a little while ago. So the lighting is quite yellow, and but there it is, you know, politics in all its glory, the glamour. I actually have my computer, my laptop balanced on a recycling bin, which was the only thing that raised it up high enough for me to be able to make relative eye contact with the camera. So again, it's important for people to see behind the scenes, you know, and know what this actually is like. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about myself. You heard a lot, I think a good amount about my full and educational background. I do always like to leave a lot of time for questions, just so you can actually get answers to things that you're interested in. But maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about maybe what brought me to Princeton, a bit of my experience there, what it has meant to me and the work that I've done, and also some reflections on this moment in time as well. So just about me, I mean, the reason that I ended up at Princeton, and I think at least in my program, it's the case for a lot of people, is that, you know, we know that we want to be of service. We know that we want to contribute to positive change. And you know, when I saw that particular degree, when I was looking for a degree after law school, it just seemed like it was purpose built for that. You don't necessarily know what you want to do, but you want to have a really good toolbox of skills. You want to be able to explore your interests, and you want to know that after you leave, you can do many different things. That's definitely what I got at Princeton. You know, the program that I was in is a very international program at the graduate level. I would say at least 40% of the students were international students. And we really were all there in one way or another because we wanted to be of service. And so for me, that was very much the reason that I went to Princeton. I would say that the other reason that I chose to go to Princeton is that the first degree I had done, those of you who don't know the Canadian system, we don't have many law schools. So they're all well considered. But I would say mine was considered fairly alternative. It had a focus on Indigenous law, and many of our foundational courses were taught through an Indigenous lens, which was very meaningful to me and one of the reasons that I chose to attend there. But it's, you know, it was viewed, I would say, in a more alternative way. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, for a woman of color that is interested in affecting change, that is interested in being taken seriously, I can assure you that having a degree from Princeton has always helped. Don't underestimate that. It shuts a lot of people up pretty quickly when you say you've gone to Princeton. Even when you don't know what you're talking about, if you say that you went to Princeton, it helps. So everyone knows that joke about the rankings of the best law schools in the world, and Princeton always ends up on it, even though it has no law school. It has that kind of reputation. So it has helped me, and certainly given the things that I've chosen to do with my life, given, you know, my identities, it has made things a little easier and helped to smooth the way. And so I would say one of the signature elements of my experience at Princeton, two things. First, my oldest son was practically born on campus. My husband was doing his master's in law at Columbia, so we weren't in the same city, but my entire pregnancy took place on campus, and my water broke on campus, and I headed to the hospital from Princeton, and as soon as the summer was over, I headed back to campus with a baby, a 2-month-old. And he spent many, many hours in my classes with me, sleeping or being fed. I fed him in class. And I joked that I spent quite a bit of time with my professors, my male professors, looking up at the ceiling while I was feeding him. There's this, I think, almost iconic photo now, because I released it during the leadership campaign, of me in my robes at graduation, and I'm feeding him. And I posted it on Twitter, and I'm just holding him up there, and it's about a minute before I go in. And I posted it on Twitter as a response to someone who had said to me that perhaps I was too busy being a mother to be able to run for the leadership of the party. And so I posted this photo, and I said, "Just watch me." And so that was my response to that. So another thing that Princeton gave me. So so that was a big thing. That was definitely a takeaway from Princeton, my son. The other thing was that Princeton was the place that I converted to Judaism. And this was something that was definitely years in the making. My partner and I met in law school. We've been together now for almost 30 years. I know that's quite inconceivable, but I went to law school young, and we met right at the beginning. We've been married for almost 25. And he's Jewish. His family, they're Ashkenaz and Sephardi. And it was just, we knew that we wanted to have a Jewish life, raise a Jewish family. And I had grown up in a Jewish neighborhood for most of my childhood. I was very comfortable with the traditions. I knew them very well. The values really spoke to me. And I just received the greatest gift of all, which was to happen to be at Princeton at a time when the director of the Hillel was Rabbi Jim Diamond, who also turned out to be another Canadian. And he was, you could not have asked for a better mentor than him. We spent a year together before my conversion, and he was very strict. You know, Rabbi Diamond was he described himself as an Orthodox conservative Jew. And so to him, his mind, if I was going to do this, it had to be absolutely by the book in every respect. And so he found me an Israeli student who was my tutor and taught me to read Hebrew. He prepared me for for coming before the Beit Din. And then when I was really, massively pregnant, he arranged for my mikvah as well. And then after I converted, it was just wonderful. It was a 2-year program that I was involved with. And so being there with him and with my young family and having a community on campus was really, really wonderful. It was a wonderful way to start off on my journey being Jewish. And for those of you who knew Rabbi Diamond, may his memory be a blessing. I've been in touch with his family out in Winnipeg. They read in one of the newspapers that I was running, and they contacted me very excited, and we've stayed connected ever since. For anyone who knows Jerry, Jerry's his cousin. And so, yes, it was wonderful. And in terms of what it has meant to me all of these years, it really has just been the touchstone of my life. We've lived a Jewish life. My children, both 2 boys, were both bar mitzvahed. They attended Jewish day school in practically every country we lived in. They were Jewish day school in Belgium. They were Jewish day school in Spain. It's been a wonderful experience, and it's also really grounded me in terms of my political life, because I'm someone that does what I do because I really believe in my responsibility to others. And there's so many lessons in Judaism about that, about humanistic values and community and responsibility to each other and the interconnectedness of things. And so I have found my political life to be very compatible with my Jewish values, which has been wonderful. In terms of how it has impacted my political life, I can only speak for Canada, but I can tell you that here in Canada, during the leadership race, I was surprised to find that being Jewish remains an issue for many people. There were many questions about my politics that were really rooted in my Jewish identity. There were many assumptions made about me because of my Jewish identity as well. And I left the race realizing, and it was difficult and slightly painful, I have to say, because I think our community in Canada has always believed that we are further ahead than it turns out we are. So it was difficult for me and my children and my family to realize that there is more anti-Semitism than we thought that there was, that it wasn't something that we have put behind us. And certainly on my husband's side, on his mother's side, where there are survivors, we really don't like to talk about it as a community. We really like to think that it's being resolved, and seeing it so flagrantly on display during the election and people feeling very comfortable sharing very hateful views online made it clear that this is something that we still need to be aware of, we still need to be vigilant about. And as much as we are able to, we still need to educate people. There are people, I believe, that are willing to learn and haven't had the opportunity. And while I wouldn't say that it is necessarily our responsibility to teach, it's something that I have chosen to do. It's part of what I feel that I can contribute. And I'm hoping that the next time a Jewish woman ends up in a role of significant political importance, that it's a little bit easier and that there's a little bit more understanding. So that's not always easy, but it's what I try to do. And I think part of it also is being a parent. I'm the parent of 2 Black Jewish boys, and there's a lot to be bitter about if you want to be, but I don't want them to be bitter. And I want them to always embrace and be proud of their identities, and they are. And part of that, I believe, really is making the choice to meet hate with kindness and education wherever we can. And so in terms of what is up with me now, I've been in this role for just under 2 months, so not that long. There was a tremendous amount of interest in the fact that I was the first Black person to lead a federal party in Canada, and also the first Jewish woman, and actually only the second Jewish person in Canadian history, which is very surprising because we have been in Canada for a very long time, and we have really contributed to every conceivable aspect of Canadian society. I mean, the community is very well established, real leaders. And so to see that we haven't really attained the highest levels of politics in Canada also raises some questions. And it also is something that I think we need to understand more about and try to address, because we know that diverse representation matters. It's something that matters symbolically, but it's also something that matters in terms of public policy outcomes. So for instance, I'm here in Ottawa today. This fiscal statement has just come out. One of the things that I wanted to see change was long-term care. We're looking to try to make it a universal system. We have universal healthcare here in Canada. Long-term care, for a number of reasons, was left out of that when we founded our system in the 80s. And we're trying to bring it back in. That wasn't announced today. And in my case, it's very personal. My father passed away during the pandemic in long-term care. And there were some other members of our team who had a similar experience. And so bringing that experience to public policy and being able to explain and understand how people are actually living the experience of having loved ones in long-term care right now is a very important value added to the public policy process that we're going through right now. And so one of the things that I will continue to work towards is more diversity in politics, because we have so many unprecedented challenges that we're facing that really are going to require novel solutions. And those come from everywhere, and those will always be better when we have a diversity of thought and lived experiences as well. And so for me, here in Canada, the things that I'm talking very much about are 2 things which are interconnected. One is completing our social safety net. And I lived in the States for a number of years. And so I know that the things that we are talking about up here, you can only dream of in the United States at the moment. We've had Medicare for a very long time. universal system. That's not, that is something that we've had multiple generations growing up with that. And so we're talking about the things that we consider to be unfinished business. So things like a universal basic income, which we call a guaranteed livable income, because we don't want it just to be a subsistence income. We just had our Minister of Finance today announce the government's commitment to national pharmacare. And so I think that it's conceivable within the next few years, we will have a universal pharmacare plan. She also announced their commitment to creating a national child care plan so that every child, so universal child care. I'll give it in little drips because I don't want to overwhelm you with what's happening just north of the border in terms of our universal programs. And this is a government, by the way, that's considered to be, it's not a conservative government, but it's certainly not considered to be a socialist or radical government. But we have, I guess, a higher level of comfort. So we're talking about how we can complete our social safety net so that we can guarantee a life of dignity for every person in Canada from the first day to the last day. That's very important, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think that is one of the major lessons for us to learn. And we can do it. We have all of the building blocks. I would say as long as we have the political leadership to do it, we absolutely can make those things happen. And then the other track is the climate emergency, which is an emergency. It hasn't stopped being an emergency. It is an existential threat. We have more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere now than we did last year. Warming has continued unabated. And so we have the opportunity to really plan for a green recovery. I don't use the term Green New Deal because I honestly am not sure what it means anymore. There's so many versions of it. It seems to cover a whole spectrum of thought. What we talk about a green recovery, and by that we mean accelerating our transition towards a net zero or a carbon neutral economy as quickly as possible, and using the many, many billions of dollars that we are planning to spend on fiscal stimulus to accelerate that transition. And so those are the two big things that if I can contribute to achieving those things during my time as a leader, I will be very proud. I believe that if the people who are alive today can project their minds into the future and be able to say that they were part of the generations of people that secured the future sustainability of our planet, that would really be remarkable, and certainly for me it would be a life worth living, a life well lived, and it would reflect my values as well. So with that, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I want to leave as much for you as possible. With that, I will stop, and anything that I have not mentioned, I encourage you to please ask me about.
Leader Paul, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure there will be a ton of questions. So once again, everyone, please feel free to start submitting questions in the chat, and Nick and I will be moderating. And we're going to start off with some questions of our own. So Nick, you want to take the first one?
Sure. Well, thank you again, Ms. Paul, for those great remarks. Very hopeful and uplifting vision of the future. And I hope we can get into some more details around policy. But actually, my first question, I wanted to start off a little bit broader. And you mentioned several ways in which you're kind of envisioning to, what we call tikkun olam in Judaism, or repair the world. And I'm curious, several of us students, I think when we want to do something like that in our careers, well, we often, I think, face a trade-off between working within systems of power, imperfect as they may be, to try to reform them from the inside, or maybe working outside of formal power and trying to build up new systems. And I wonder if you could speak to how, if at all, how that played into your career decisions, both in terms of entering electoral politics and also the decision to go to the Green Party, when I'm sure you had plenty of opportunities to work with the Liberals or New Democrats that traditionally have more power in Parliament, at least formal kind of power. So I'd be curious for how you weighed that in your own decisions.
Yeah. Well, with respect to the first one, you know, this is where the toolbox comes in. I want to reassure you and other students that there are many ways to contribute. I was very lucky to be raised by women who really did not try to suppress the interests of, you know, my mother and my grandmother. They didn't try to suppress the interests of you know, of myself and my siblings. They just encouraged us to make sure that whatever our talents were, we found a way to use them for the good of the community. And so my sister, for instance, is an artist, and you know, my mother was never tried to divert her to some other career path, but she did want to make sure that she was in some way contributing to the life of the community. And so that's the case with me. I really, as much as possible, try to ignore any inner voices that told me that I wasn't making the smart move. And I really tried to do what I thought at that given moment was going to be the best use of my talent, and at the same time accommodate the other things that mattered to me. I made the questionable decision, but it was a decision. It wasn't thrust upon me, but I made the decision to become a mother in my 20s while I was broke and a student. And people do ask, it eventually comes up, you know, did you actually decide that? Or, you know, or was it shotgun? It was actually a conscious decision. I don't know why we thought that was a good idea, but we did it. And it turned out to be wonderful. But I had two kids, you know, in my mid to late 20s, and I wanted to be there for them. And my partner, who's an international human rights lawyer, he also did. And so we just totally contorted our lives for a lot of years in order to be able to do that. And coming out on the other side of it now, I'm happy that we did every single thing in that respect that we did. And my life has gone actually between many different worlds. I have worked in government. I have worked for our government. I've worked for multilaterals. I've worked in civil society. I've worked on mass mobilization campaigns, and I've worked to create public policy. I've been a social entrepreneur, creating socially innovative organizations. You know, you can feel free to contribute your talents in all of those different ways. I would say in my case, sorry, there's a light that started flashing here. I don't know if it's telling me something. I'm in an unusual, and I'm not normally in this room. In my case, what I know is that there are certain challenges that we face that absolutely require government intervention. You know, the pandemic was not going to be solved simply by individual action or even micro action. The climate crisis cannot be solved by any one community, by any one country. It's going to require coordinated global action. At the same time, the thing that is most motivating to political actors is public pressure. And that is where civil society comes in. And that is why it is so important for people like myself who are working on the organized political side of things to maintain a close relationship with civil society organizations. You know, the two elements are the opposition and the proposition. And my husband and his work, which is most often in countries that are at the tipping point either tipping toward or away from conflict, toward or away from democracy. That's the work that he does. He works in a field called transitional justice and you know, inclusive transitions. The tipping point usually finds itself at the moment where opposition becomes proposition, when you're heading towards democracy or sustainable peace. And so the opposition comes from the streets, it comes from mass mobilization, it comes from civil society. The proposition is equally important, and that often comes through organized politics. So you can move in and out of the world. And I promise you, I will not be in this world forever. It is a ruthless world, it is exhausting. I can't imagine doing this for more than 8 years. You heard it here first. But it really, it occurred to me the other day that when Obama started as president, his hair was a gorgeous shade of black. And when he left, it was completely prematurely white. So I'm not planning to go out that way.
Can't blame you for that. I would love to pick up on a thread of something that you mentioned. You talked about the need for kind of sustained global public pressure on organized politics, on kind of the institutions of power, in order to move things forward. And I'm wondering, you also spoke about sort of the ways in which Jewish values particularly motivate us maybe to be involved, to see ourselves as interconnected, to see ourselves as responsible for each other and for the world. And so I'd be really curious to hear, what do you think the role of Jewish communities, especially in North America, should be over the next couple of years? How do you think that we, as a broader Jewish community and within specific organizations and institutions, how can we be allies in this fight? Like, what can we do to move things forward?
The first thing is to ask that question, and I will actually say that the experience of running in the leadership race has also made me ask, how can I, as a Black person, be allies to the Jewish community? Because as strange as this will sound, if you haven't been through this experience, I was attacked far more often as a result of my Jewish identity than I ever was because of my Black identity during the leadership race. And it may be that my Jewish identity was just a proxy, attacking that was just a proxy for saying the things that could not be said about me as a Black person. But I mean, it was a very asymmetrical, let's say, balance between the attacks for one and the other. And realizing how live this issue is, it occurs to me that our community, should be, I want to say our community, that part of the Black community, the Black diaspora, should be supporting the Jewish community in continuing to combat anti-Semitism. But in terms of the Jewish community being allies to other communities, I do think that there is a responsibility there. And again, I'm not saying that it's fair, but I believe that communities that have a very direct, and I would say even a contemporary understanding of oppression and of the tragic end results of unchecked hate, they have a responsibility to support communities who continue to suffer. And so here in Canada, the Indigenous community, Indigenous peoples really need the allyship of the Jewish community. There are many things that they are struggling to preserve that we understand as a community are worth preserving. And in terms of the Black community, there is a lot of nostalgia, even here in Canada, for the relationship that used to exist between the Black and Jewish community. And perhaps it was never as profound as people imagine, or maybe it was, but there is a lot of wistfulness about it. And there is still a lot of need for it. And so asking the question that you asked there is the very first step. And then just not being overwhelmed by the idea. You don't have to do everything or nothing. There are many simple gestures that people can take in their day-to-day lives to be an ally and to support dismantling systems of repression. So I would say find the ways that feel most comfortable to you, ask before you do anything, and know that every gesture matters, because when they are added up, they can really make all of the difference.
Great, thanks. And we're getting some questions coming in, so thanks for those. And again, encourage folks to keep submitting questions that you'd like to ask to Leader Paul. In the meantime, we have a question. Of course, you've probably heard that we had an election in the United States over the past few weeks, which is going to lead to a lot of changes, especially on the climate front. So we have folks who are interested in hearing, in this moment of transition in the US, what steps would you like to see the new Biden administration take to become more actively engaged in climate policy? And I would add a Canadian spin. I'm curious also if you can talk about how this transition might change your ability in Canada to affect change on climate and environmental policy there.
We were just talking about that today, because one of the things that I pushed for in the leadership race, let's say one of my signature policies, was a carbon border tariff. This is something that a carbon border tariff, for those who don't know, is just kind of what it sounds like. It's a tariff imposed on goods that are produced in a carbon intensive way. It's a way of protecting the businesses within your territory while at the same time incentivizing trading partners to clean up their act. It prevents carbon leakage. It prevents the flight of industry from an area that is seeking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to an area that has weak standards. And so this is something was pushing for during the race. It was picked up by the media here. It was dismissed by the government here initially as an idea, another one of those fanciful, flighty, unrealistic Green Party ideas, until President-elect Joe Biden made it a part of his I guess you call it platform or campaign book platform, made it a part of his. He made bringing in a carbon border tariff a part of it. And he has said so subsequently. And so lo and behold, today in the fiscal economic statement, our government has announced their interest in participating and exploring the eventual creation of a carbon border, a shared carbon border, I would hope, with the United States. The ambition that I have is that we have a North American carbon border adjustment. It's a way of protecting businesses. It's a way of, particularly with the help of the United States, really pushing the needle forward in terms of getting countries that are resistant to setting greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets to do so. And so it's kind of one of these win-win things. So there is an example. There is no question that the appointment of John Kerry as the climate czar and as a member of the inner cabinet of President-elect Biden is a very powerful signal here as well in terms of the prioritization of the climate. And usually we tend to follow those kinds of signals ourselves. And then finally, Canada is going to have to really accelerate its thinking on economic diversification in certain parts of our country, because the fact that President-elect Biden had previously announced his intention to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline project is something that is going to have a tremendous impact in parts of our country, and is going to force the provinces that were part of that project to really think about how they're going to replace that investment with something more sustainable. So yes, it's had, I would say, seismic impacts. We've had quite a bit of reporting about what this is going to mean for the climate for us. I will say though that President-elect Biden still supports fracking, and it is highly incompatible with a climate agenda. I understand why he said that, and perhaps he's committed to that promise now. But it is highly incompatible with a climate agenda. And so I hope that the environmental community, activists, citizens will continue to pressure him to reconsider that decision.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, it's helpful to have just to hear more specifics about how this translates not just in the US, but also in Canada. And maybe along the lines of what you just shared, I'm also curious, there's a lot of talk about just transitions, both in Canada and the US, especially for communities that have been heavily reliant on fossil fuels for their livelihoods and their sense of identity. Obviously, you mentioned Pennsylvania next to New Jersey. I know in Canada and the Western provinces, there's a huge presence of the oil and gas industry, and that has economic contributions, but also, again, that sense of identity. How do you think we can best kind of accelerate the action to climate change while also helping those communities transition from what they've historically depended on for their community?
Yeah, I think about those communities quite a lot, not only because my brother, up until very recently, worked as a roughneck out in the oil patch, which is, again, another thing people don't expect to hear me say. It's not very common to have Black people working in the oil patch, period, in Canada, in any case, and then having the leader of the Green Party having an oil worker as a brother is also quite surprising to people. But, you know, this is why I say again that diverse representation matters. I don't just mean racial, ethnic, religious. I really mean socioeconomically, geographically, gender identities, all of these things, because we just all have, each of us has a different lived experience. And so I worry a lot about these communities, mostly because I am concerned that the change that needs to happen is going to happen or going to be initiated too late to save those communities. Here in Canada, out on the East Coast, some of you may have heard of it, even if you're, you know, even if you don't know Canada too well. We had a very robust cod fishery. We had many generations of Canadians who lived out in Newfoundland, right on the East Coast, on the Atlantic, and their entire community was built around this identity of fishing. And, you know, the villages were there, and people, you know, managed to retain even young people because this is what you did. And there were warnings that this industry was in decline. There were warnings that this industry was at risk. And the powers that be, both governmental and corporate, insisted that everything was fine until the cod stocks completely collapsed. And they still haven't returned, and those communities died. Those communities were completely displaced. There was nothing left. There was nothing left, and it wreaked total devastation on those communities. They have never been rebuilt. And so I worry about that happening in parts of the United States. I worry about that happening in parts of Canada, where the message of economic diversification, of creating the jobs of the future in sustainable industries is going to arrive too late, and that the voices of the politicians and the corporations that keep saying everything's fine with fossil fuels, until the day that it simply is not an economically viable sector anymore, will prevail. And then those communities will be decimated. So the very best way that we can prevent displacement, that kind of mass displacement of communities, is really by helping those communities to transition as soon as possible. And the good news is, and a lot of the news is coming out of the United States, because you're actually well ahead of Canada in this regard, which is something that always surprises Canadians to hear. We can be very arrogant and imagine that, you know, we are just more progressive in every conceivable way. And on the climate, it is not true. Even after 5 years of a Trump presidency, the United States has been more successful in reducing greenhouse gas emissions than Canada. Canada is one of the worst emitters per capita in the world. And so the news that we're getting out of the United States and places that are working towards a green economy is that the jobs that are being created are jobs that oil patch workers, that fossil fuel workers can take on day one without having to go through any kind of extensive skills retraining programs. The jobs that they receive, they pay more money. They pay between 7 and 9% more than what they have been making out in the oil patch. They're jobs that they can take in their communities. And so you avoid the displacement that can happen when an industry shuts down altogether and there's no alternative. And their jobs, 45% of the jobs that are being created are jobs that can be taken without a college degree. So these are jobs, you know, again, we're talking about almost half of the workforce in the green sector being people with a high school degree or less. So that is very good news. And those are the kind of messages that we're trying to put out there, because we're trying to let people know that we're not talking about something that has to cost communities their identity, that has to displace them. We're talking about something that actually is a huge good news story. And there are some people that have an interest in not sharing that story because they want to extract maximum profit, but we're hoping again that the voices will prevail on the other side so that these communities can be protected from the worst. And as I said, we've seen it happen in Canada. We just want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, encourage folks to keep submitting questions. We have another good 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, we have a question around another policy focused question, but more around the intersection of climate and environmental justice. Mm-hmm. And so with with the murder of George Floyd this summer, obviously there was a huge society-wide reckoning around racism in all aspects of society. And certainly environmental groups weren't impervious to that. There was a lot of reckoning among big green kind of environmental groups about how, while they've been advocating for climate action, maybe neglecting some of the more local, tangible issues around environmental justice and just the disproportionate amount of environmental pollution that communities of color and other marginalized communities have faced. And so I wonder, as kind of the Green Party leader, I wonder how do you reconcile those two things? Do you see environmental justice and climate change as kind of in lockstep together? Or are there certain kind of climate change solutions that have been floated around that maybe we need to rethink now with more of an environmental justice lens?
Yeah, well, in terms of Canada, the environmental movement has really, to a large extent, been a very white and fairly affluent movement. The Green Party is a very white and pretty affluent, well-educated party. And it started in the 80s. You start with a certain group of people and it grows from there, and people tend to know people like themselves. And so the people who founded it were well-educated, white, affluent people. And so it just continued to grow along those lines, as did much of the environmental movement in Canada. And that's a problem because we know that to affect the kind of change that we're seeking to affect, really it's important to have many voices and many allies. And so it's something that in the case of our party, we're actively seeking to change. I do believe it's one of the reasons the members selected me as a leader. I ran on a platform of diversity as one of the key elements. We have spoken about, but not spoken enough about environmental racism. That's the term that we use here in Canada. And environmental racism is when it's what you described, Nick. It's when low-income communities or communities of color, and in the case of Canada, also Indigenous communities. They tend to be Indigenous communities and Black communities in Canada, when they are situated in close proximity to toxic sites, to industrially hazardous sites, when their water supplies are poisoned, those sorts of things. Some of you may have seen the film, There's Something in the Water. Has anyone heard of that? There's Something in the Water by Ellen Page, the actor. I recommend it. It's all about environmental racism, and she is Canadian, actually. She's based in the States, but she's Canadian, and she filmed the documentary out in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so, this is something we haven't talked enough about, mostly because the people, again, speaking in our party and in the environmental movement, did not come from those communities. And so we are working to create alliances, working to support each other's work. And more than anything for me, I think it's important to give that leadership the space so that it can direct the solutions for those communities. We're also talking about, and I know, some people have gotten fed up with the word intersectionality, but there are many examples of it. We say very clearly that there is no climate justice without social justice, because, I can give many examples, but I'll just give one. You may look at the lack of buses in a rural community, the lack of access to buses in a rural community, and say, oh, this is just a climate issue. Because, if we don't have buses, people will use their cars, they'll drive their trucks, and it's just bad for the climate. So really, this is an environmental issue. It's a climate issue, that's it. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll see that the lack of bus service in rural communities is one of the leading causes of attacks of sexual assault on women and Indigenous women in Canada. And it was, one of the key recommendations of our report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada was that rural bus service be reinstalled so that women stopped having to, hitch rides on the side of the road with people that they don't know. So those are the way that these things, that the climate and the environment intersect with social justice issues that we wouldn't necessarily consider but we do begin to consider, again, when we have more diversity of experiences talking about these issues. And I can't impress upon everyone how important it is for us to move beyond our echo chambers on the climate, because we do need a groundswell of sustained pressure on political actors if we are going to affect change in time. And, you know, at least in Canada, the demographics are only headed in one direction. So the direction of diversity, just to make it totally clear.
That's the good direction. That's what
yeah, it is. If we tap into it, you know, we have it, and we unfortunately don't nearly tap into it enough, whether it's in our political life. You know, you look at the highest levels of politics in this country, and there's very little diversity. You know, we have, if you take me out of the equation, we have of the 13 provincial leaders and 5 federal leaders. So that's 18 leaders. Of those 18, if you take me out of it, there is only 1 woman. So of the 18 leaders at the highest level of Canadian politics in Canada, only 2 of them are women. So we have a long way to go, not just in politics, but in public policy in general. The higher up you go in agencies, boards, commissions, senior civil service, senior roles within civil society too, because NGOs and not-for-profits are no exception to this. It becomes less and less diverse. And that has created some of these problems. I mean, this is, you know, along the lines of the one you just mentioned, Nick.
That actually leads right into what I think will be probably our last question from the audience, which is directly about that actually. And it's just like, what practical recommendations do you have on how to kind of expand the diversity of voices and partners who are able to kind of play powerful roles in promoting a greener environment and promoting environmental justice and climate justice? What are sort of the concrete steps to get from here to there?
See, this would be my moment to pitch you all on joining the party. But I take it that you're mostly American, so I'll save you that pitch. Only to say that if there are any, you know, bright young things on the call who they're trying to figure out what to do for their next internship, they can give me a call. And I definitely know what to do with you. Beyond that, I would say to everyone else, what can you do? You can, the formula, and you know, as Nick said, this is something that I actually wrote my personal statement when I was applying to Princeton about the issue of underrepresentation and wanting to really understand the underlying factors and advanced knowledge and all of that. And it's the first thing that I did. The fellowship that I received from the Echoing Green Foundation was to create the first institute in Canada focused on advancing knowledge, advocacy, training, et cetera, to increase the representation of underrepresented groups in Canadian politics, and also in senior public policy roles in general. And so the formula here it is you know, for people who really want to help with this, they need to scout the talent. And by that, I mean, every one of you should be the eyes and ears in your community for talented people from diverse backgrounds. And then you need to recruit that talent. And I say that as a second step because there are so many incredibly talented people who are already demonstrating leadership, but they don't necessarily see in themselves what you do because they don't have they don't have the role models, they don't have the modeling. And again, this is, you know, thanks to Princeton and other institutions, I assure you that this has been studied to death. You know, people are what they see. You know, people do the things that they understand, where they have a touchstone. And so if you see leadership in one of these communities, you see a leader, don't hesitate to tell them. They may never have thought of themselves in the way that you see them. So you scout it, you recruit it. And then when those people present themselves for leadership roles, whether elected or unelected, support them. You have got to support them if you're really serious about it. Supporting them through financial and human and moral support is incredibly important. In the case of me running, it was very nice to have people say, oh, you should consider running. But the difference makers were the people who said, if you run, I will help you raise money. If you run, I will help you find volunteers. And if you run, you know, I will make sure that, you know, you have a shoulder to support you when you're just fed up. Those were the things that really made the difference for me. And I can tell you the Jewish community in Canada was tremendous in this regard, a total difference maker for me. And then vote for them. You know, if they're running for elected office, vote for those people. That's really the formula: scout, recruit, support, vote. That's the way that it's done, and it's really not more complicated than that. In the case of Canada, I can tell you that you know, again, the research confirms that a woman, a person of color, or a woman of color, we are as electable as our white male counterpart, assuming that we are running in a winnable seat. You know, all things being equal, we are as electable. And in the case of women, women are more electable than men, which, you know, people are always surprised to hear. But in the case of Canada, you put two, you know, a male and a female in a winnable riding as potential candidates, the woman is more likely to win. So it's all those other barriers that are keeping more diversity outside of politics. And in terms of allyship, coming back to that question, those are things that you can definitely do that would make a huge and tangible difference.
Well, thank you so much for that incredible insight and for everything that you've shared over the past hour. I think we're gonna have to wrap it up now, but it's been such a pleasure getting to talk to you. Just want to thank you again for your time, for managing to get on this call, even in the midst of very important work that you're doing. And I want to extend gratitude also again to Nick for co-moderating this event, for everyone else who helped to make it happen. Before we go, just one quick announcement for everyone on the call, because Hanukkah is coming up really soon. Just want to let you all know that the CJL community is going to be virtually together for the holiday, and we would love to have everyone join in. We're going to be doing candle lightings over Zoom for every night of Hanukkah, hosted by, you know, different folks in the CJL community in different time zones around the world. And we'd love to have you all join us. And we're going to have a big CJL-wide candle lighting party, really, on Tuesday, December 15th. So look out for more info about that. But yeah, thank you again so much, Ms. Paul, for joining us. And we're so excited to host you in person when we can again at the CJL.
Thank you. Absolutely, absolutely. It would be a pleasure. As I said, it was really my home away from home at Princeton. And the 2 years I spent there have just been the gift that keeps on giving, really. It was just incredibly important to me and my family. So I will always find time. So I would be happy to be invited back again. And if there's anything that I do that is of interest and anyone would like to connect, the organizers have my contact details. I am, you know, this is the way it works, right? With the Princeton community, I'm absolutely open. I've actually hosted, even in Barcelona, every year that we were there after we founded the Barcelona Public Policy Hub. We hosted interns, and we helped to arrange internships for Princeton students with other Barcelona-based organizations. So, you know, it's a pleasure, and I'm happy to do it. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, and
happy holidays to everyone.
Happy holidays.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.